This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Ateli Edwards. Tonight's top stories. China's Defense Ministry calls its probe of top General Zhang Youxia an important step against corruption, while providing no new details on the case that Washington says it's watching with interest. Beijing and London signalling a reset, with leaders calling for a closer strategic partnership. Prime Minister Starmer touts progress on tariffs and travel, while President Xi urges more cooperation. Now, ASEAN's new play on a code of conduct with China, monthly face-to-face talks it hopes Beijing will sign on to manage unresolved territorial disputes in the South China Sea. A record profit and record sales for two East Asian corporate titans. Will break down the latest numbers from Samsung and Toyota. Also tonight, the implications for the Korean Peninsula and the region after Pyongyang signaled its intent to further develop its nuclear war deterrent. And why Taiwan remains divided over the death penalty, years after a landmark ruling upheld it as constitutional. China's Defense Ministry has stayed cautious in its first outing with the media since the shock announcement on the weekend of a corruption probe into top General Zhang Youxia. Well, he is currently under investigation for serious violations of discipline and the law. Zhang was the second in command after President Xi Jinping of the powerful Central Military Commission that has full authority over China's armed forces. The high-profile veteran also outranks the defense minister. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio says that Washington is closely watching the developments that some analysts say could affect communications between the world's two most powerful militaries. Tan Sihui joins us live now from Beijing. So, Sihui, you were just at the Defense Ministry for their monthly news conference. Curious to know what is the latest on the probe into Zhang Youxia.
Well, we're standing just across the road from where the Defense Ministry is, and that was where the press briefing was held just about a couple of hours ago. Around 10 questions by journalists were asked about the investigations revolving around the top general Zhang Youxia as well as Liu Zhenli. Now, the atmosphere was slightly tense, especially when a question was asked in relation to a Wall Street Journal article which had stated accusations that top general Zhang Youxia had leaked nuclear secrets to the U.S. But to that, the Defense Ministry spokesperson said to refer to authoritative information and not to come up with subjective conjecture. Now, another question that was posed about whether the investigations would affect the operations of the Central Military Commission, which is the highest level military command body, or the operations of the People's Liberation Army. The Defense Ministry spokesperson said that the more there is investigations into corruptions of the PLA, the stronger the PLA would become. Now, he also had this to say when asked if investigations would affect high-level exchanges between China and Western nations. This was what he had to say.
我们坚决反对对中方有关反腐行动的污蔑抹黑。中国军队在党的坚强领导下，始终秉持开放合作理念。 将继续与各国军队开展对话交流，深化军事互信，加强务实合作，为国际和地区和平稳定贡献中国力量。
Up till now, we still do not know the specific details of the investigations revolving around Mr. Zhang and Mr. Liu. But what we do know, official lines say that they have been suspected of serious violations of discipline and law. And according to an editorial published by an army newspaper, it had said that they have seriously betrayed the trust and expectations of the Communist Party and the Central Military Commission, and had fostered political and corruption problems that undermine the party's absolute leadership over the military and threaten the party's ruling foundation. So who's left at the Central Military Commission? What we do know is that it is Chinese President Xi Jinping himself, as well as the Central Military Commission's anti-graft officer. And what we also do know is that in recent months, in October 2025, 8 top generals were expelled from the Communist Party on graft charges. We also know that in recent years, 2 former defense ministers were purged for corruption. That is Mr. Wei Fenghe as well as Mr. Li Shangfu. So there are also questions about the long-term plans of the military, and some of the journalists had asked questions to the Defense Ministry spokesperson. They had asked about the exact number of the senior officers that are still able to carry out the work of the PLA. The Defense Ministry spokesperson could not give information on that. Another question was also asked about when the next Central Military Commission meeting will be held. Again, the Defense Ministry spokesperson said that this is a secret of the nation. And this also comes just as China's military is hoping by 2027 to become and achieve world-class standards, and by 2035 to complete its modernization drive.
Tan Zihui in Beijing, appreciate that report. Well, meantime, China and the UK signaling a reset after years of strained relations. After talks between Chinese President Xi Jinping and British Premier Keir Starmer in Beijing, both leaders calling for a closer strategic partnership following their meeting at the Great Hall of the People.
中方愿同英方发展长期稳定的全面战略伙伴关系，这将造福两国人民，也惠及世界。你这次来访受到了高度关注，好事多磨。
As you have said, this is the first visit by a UK Prime Minister in 8 years. To my mind, that's been far too long, and I'm very pleased to be the Prime Minister that comes here for the first time in 8 years.
For more, we are joined now by Ollie Barrett for CNA from London and CNA's senior correspondent Tan Yuguan in Shanghai. First to you, Yuguan, the key takeaways from Mr. Xi on the state of ties.
Well, you heard him there that he used the idiom 好事多磨, literally meaning good things takes a lot more grinding, implying that when something is worth it, it often doesn't go smoothly. There are usually twists, delays, or obstacles before it succeeds. But he says engagement is unavoidable. President Xi pointed out that as permanent members of the UN Security Council and major global economies, both China and the UK need to strengthen dialogue and cooperation, whether be it to maintain world peace or to promote economic development and well-being of their respective people. He adds that China was ready to develop a long-term and comprehensive strategic partnership with Britain. He emphasized that mutual trust is the foundation for stable, long-term development and relationship. And he also highlights that China has always adhered to the path of peaceful development and has never initiated war, nor has occupied an inch of another country's territory, and vowed that no matter how strong China becomes, it will not pose a threat to other countries. To be honest, it's hard to say if that was a veiled jab at Britain's colonial past or how other claimants of the South China Sea would take to that remark. But Xi did continue to say that China's cultural tradition is harmony is precious, and it pursues harmony in diversity. And he says the essence of China-UK economic and trade cooperation is mutual benefit and win-win results.
So, Ollie, maybe you want to jump in here. Mr. Starmer has been talking about progress, but what is he touting exactly?
I tell you, there are a number of areas he says that there has been real progress in these conversations already. Tariffs, for example, on whiskey. He says that is something he thinks that there's been real progress on, and that could, for the whiskey industry here in the UK, make a huge difference if that market was to be significantly opened up. He says that there have also been discussions about visa-free entry to China for British people in a way that isn't currently the case. It doesn't look like necessarily there's an agreement on that yet, but certainly some progress towards it. A series of business deals in the offing as well. And it does look like the two men also talked at length about illegal migration and how China can help the UK tackle some of those small boat crossings across the English Channel that have been so problematic for Britain. And one of the ways we think they're going to do that off the back of these meetings is giving information to the UK about some of the Chinese manufactured engines that are being used by these people smuggling gangs to facilitate some of those journeys. It also looks like the two men bonded over football. We're told that Keir Starmer gave President Xi a football used in the weekend's match between Manchester United and Arsenal. We understand President Xi is a keen Manchester United fan. He will have been rather happy about the outcome of that match than Keir Starmer, who supports Arsenal.
President Xi, a Man United fan, I didn't know that. So Hugo, let's bring you in here because Mr. Xi, he also appeared. Interesting to note that he also appeared to acknowledge criticism that Mr. Starmer faced for this particular outreach. So what is this? What does this signal?
Well, the Chinese side clearly wants to make life a little easier for Mr. Starmer, given what he had went through just to get here. In the exchange, Mr. Xi did say, as long as it is the right thing to do in accordance with the fundamental interests of the country and its people, leaders should not shy away from difficulties and will forge ahead bravely. Now, in the exchange, President Xi also dropped that China is willing to actively consider implementing unilateral visa-free travel for British citizens. I think that would be a welcome news for would-be travelers to China, as well as those with business ties with China. He said in rolling out the sweetener, Mr. Xi noted that both China and the UK are great cultural nations and have made important contributions to mankind. So he says that both sides should strengthen cultural exchanges and further facilitate personnel exchanges. He says he welcomed more visits to China by the British government, the parliament, or various sectors of society to gain a comprehensive and objective and accurate understanding of China. Mr. Starmer is visiting with more than 60 representatives from various business and cultural institutions. And this afternoon, along with Prime Minister Li Qiang, he witnessed the signing of a number of deals. He will also make a trip here in Shanghai, the financial capital of China. So it is clear that UK and China are ready to do business. Oteli?
Well, that's all well and good, but Ollie, what are some of the key sticking points that remain unresolved?
There are a few, and we're told that several of them were raised by Keir Starmer with President Xi Jinping. One is human rights, the broad issue around some of the British concerns about human rights with relations to China. Hong Kong, concerns about Hong Kong. Jimmy Lai, the UK citizen currently held in detention. And one of the things that British journalists always press at with the UK government when we have meetings between British and Chinese officials is really how long those parts of those conversations are that are potentially tricky and thorny and difficult. Were they just fleeting mentions, or was it more than that? And what government sources are telling CNA, UK government sources are telling CNA, is that these were substantive discussions. And Keir Starmer, I'm sure, will want it to be viewed back home as if those were indeed more than fleeting mentions. And earlier in the day, we were hearing both men acknowledging that there are differences between the two countries in a number of areas, but both men believing at this point that they can move to a better relationship between the two countries, despite some of those differences that Keir Starmer mentioned in those meetings today.
Well, that's a good start. Thanks so very much for those reports, Ollie Barrett for CNA from London and CNA's senior correspondent Tan Yuguan in Shanghai. Now, some observers have classified Mr. Starmer's China trip as necessary but high risk. Well, earlier we spoke with Professor Kerry Brown from King's College London, who shared his insights into Mr. Starmer's visit.
Well, at the moment, I mean, a number of powers are going. Canada, I believe Germany, the Chancellor is going. There'll be a lot of European visitors. So I'm not sure it's that high risk. I mean, it's probably riskier to not go. The issues that they've got to talk about are firstly, the extraordinary new geopolitics where America is in some ways more unpredictable than anyone else at the moment. For different reasons, China is concerned with that. Britain, its security alliance is very strong with America, but there's been lots of questions lately because of the issue over Greenland and Trump's doubts about NATO. I think also economically, Britain has to recognise that China is now a technology superpower. It's producing incredibly important innovations and technology in AI, in environmental science, in issues like this. And so really, we're kind of risking more if we don't go than if we do. This is one of the very few opportunities for Britain to speak directly to the leader of China, Xi Jinping. It's very hard to get access to him. And so it's important at the top level to kind of create a more, kind of constructive and pragmatic relationship. We have big differences, of course. We've always had big differences. Britain and China have been arguing for a long, long time. But actually, on fundamental issues, environment, AI, things like this, we agree more than we disagree, and so we can use that as a basis to try and up our other collaborations and be clear of where we want to work and where we don't want to work.
Coming up next on East Asia tonight, NVIDIA boss says China is still finalizing approval for sales of its powerful H200 AI chip, casting doubt on earlier reports that shipments had already been cleared. Plus, Hyundai flags ongoing pressure from US tariffs after reporting a worse-than-expected slump in fourth-quarter profits. Hello again. Good to have your company on East Asia tonight. It is now time for your business news. And it appears the path for NVIDIA's chip sales to China is still not clear. CEO Jensen Huang says Beijing authorities are working on a license for H200 sales.
The actual license for H200 is being finalized, and I'm hoping that also the Chinese government would allow NVIDIA to sell in H200. So they have to decide, and I'm looking forward to a favorable decision. I think that H200 is very good for America technology leadership. It's also very good for the Chinese market, and the customers would very much like to have H200. And so I'm looking forward to a good decision. And so we just have to wait patiently.
Huang made the comments in Taipei today after a trip to China, where he said he met customers, partners, and government officials. His comments mark a shift from earlier reports that cited sources saying that China had already approved its first batch of H200 chip imports. Now, the H200, NVIDIA's second most powerful AI chip, has become a key point of tension in US-China relations. Despite strong demand from Chinese firms and US approval for exports, Beijing's hesitation to allow imports has remained the main barrier to shipments. South Korea tech giant Samsung posting record quarterly profit, riding massive market demand for the memory chips. Samsung's revenue for the fourth quarter of around $66 billion, up 20% year on year. Its operating profit rose 209% to $13.3 billion year on year. Well, the gains primarily driven by chip business, which made up more than 80% of its total profit. Samsung expects overall revenue for its HBM memory chips to more than triple this year, as all orders for the chips have been secured. But its mobile and display businesses warn of a challenging year, as memory price hikes push up prices for chips used in consumer electronics, like smartphones and laptops. Well, that warning weighing on investor sentiment. Samsung shares ended the day about 1% down. Now, AI optimism boosting Japanese chip equipment maker Advantest. Shares jumped by as much as 14% to a record high after the company beat earnings estimates and raised its forecast, and they closed up at about 5.17%. Well, the firm hiked its operating profit by 21% to nearly $3 billion for the financial year ending March 2026. And that's after posting third quarter operating income of $744 million, topping analyst consensus. The firm also raised its full-year operating profit forecast. Advantest sells equipment that can identify defects in advanced chips, and it's benefiting from a surge in global spending on data centers and other AI infrastructure. Meanwhile, Toyota Motor retaining its position as the global top vehicle seller for the 6th year in a row. The company sold more than 10 million 537,000 vehicles globally last year, its first record high in 2 years, far exceeding Volkswagen's 2025 total of just under 9 million vehicles. The company maintained solid sales in North America, even after President Trump's tariffs on imported cars. Sales in the U.S. alone grew 8%, with shipments rising more than 14% from the previous year. By type of vehicle, hybrids are cash cows, sustaining strong momentum for the company. Now, the world's largest car maker sold 4.4 million hybrid vehicles globally last year, accounting for 42% of the total sold, while the number of battery electric vehicles also grew 42% from the previous year. Well, Hyundai, though, not been as lucky to dodge the hit from U.S. tariffs. South Korea's largest automaker reporting a worse-than-expected 40% plunge in fourth quarter operating profit and warns the duties would continue to hurt its financials this year. Hyundai reporting operating profit of around $1.2 billion for the October-December period, far below its estimate of $1.9 billion. Earnings were also hit by higher sales incentives to clear U.S. electric vehicle inventory after EV subsidies ended late last year. And this marked the automaker's third straight quarterly profit decline. Now, Hyundai expects challenging global market conditions to persist this year amid weak industry growth and intensifying competition in emerging markets. But it aims to improve margins and revenue while boosting investment in robotics and autonomous vehicles. Well, that lifted investor sentiment, sending the share up 7.2%. Singapore's sovereign wealth fund, GIC, is teaming up with Sony Music in a new joint venture on acquiring music copyrights to capitalize on growth in a global streaming industry. Bloomberg reports $2 to $3 billion will be invested in the partnership. GIC says the fund seeks to be a creative and flexible partner to industry leaders like Sony. The music copyright market has boomed over the past decade, driven by paid streaming services. Well, Sony is the world's largest music publisher, with artists such as Harry Styles, Adele, and Beyoncé under its labels. Well, the deal adds to a broader wave of institutional capital flowing into music assets. Rival Universal Music Group teamed up with Dundee Partners in early 2024, while Warner Music Group and Bain Capital formed a $1.2 billion joint venture last year. Ford's plan to widen its relationship with Chinese battery maker CATL to produce energy storage batteries is drawing scrutiny from U.S. lawmakers. CATL has been designated by the Pentagon as having alleged links to the Chinese military. Well, U.S. Representative John Molina raised concerns in a letter to Ford about the automaker's plans to build data center batteries with technology from CATL. Now, he also questioned Ford's plan to enter the energy storage business with CATL. Ford said it will use its existing battery plants in Kentucky and Michigan to produce energy storage system batteries, with plans to bring initial capacity online within 18 months. Ford announced it in 2023 plans to build a $3 billion plant in Michigan, making battery cells using technology from CATL. Production is expected to begin this year. Well, Ford said back in December that it was taking a $19.5 billion write-down and discontinuing production of several EV models. Shares of Chinese property developers surged today following local media reports that authorities are easing reporting regulations aimed at stopping a housing slump. Chinese authorities introduced the so-called Three Red Lines policy in 2020 as part of efforts to clamp down on a housing boom. Developers took on mountains of debt, fueling fears of a crash. Under the policy, developers had to submit monthly reports, which included its liabilities that should not exceed 70% of assets. Net debt should not exceed equity, and cash on hand must be almost equal to its short-term debts. The policy, however, worsened a credit crunch, leading to a default of around $130 billion in the property sector. Amongst them, China Evergrande, which was once the country's largest developer. Bloomberg also reports that some companies even stopped reporting as early as 2023. Analysts say that the policy has run its course, as many aggressive developers have defaulted. But even with the ending of it, companies will still find it hard to raise funds from investors wary of the sluggish property market. Well, time now for a short break, but coming up next on East Asia Tonight. Analysis from an expert after Pyongyang snubbed Washington and Seoul's outreach for denuclearization, with Kim Jong-un signaling his intent to boost the North's nuclear war capabilities. And ASEAN foreign ministers meet in Cebu as the bloc navigates a diplomatic tightrope, balancing ties with both the US and China, its two biggest trading and defense partners. This is East Asia Tonight, and here are the headlines we're following. China says its investigation of top General Zhang Youxia is a key step against corruption, but the Defense Ministry provided no new details on the case that Washington says it's watching with interest. China and Britain signal a reset in relations after a meeting of their leaders in Beijing. Prime Minister Starmer touting progress on tariffs and travel, while President Xi Jinping stresses the need for more cooperation. And ASEAN pushes for monthly talks with China to fast-track a code of conduct on the South China Sea in a bid to ease tensions in a vital waterway. Managing competing territorial claims in the South China Sea among the top priorities for ASEAN foreign ministers as they gather in Cebu for the bloc's first major ministerial meeting under the Philippines chairmanship. Now, the ASEAN chair says it is hopeful to start monthly face-to-face talks with China in a bid to speed up progress on a code of conduct for the disputed waters. The idea for the document was first raised more than 20 years ago, but progress has been slow. Closer to home, the bloc also focused on Myanmar. Philippine Foreign Affairs Secretary Maria Teresa Lazaro says that ASEAN does not recognize the country's recent elections, the first since the military seized power in 2021. She added that what happens next depends entirely on the country's military government. Well, ASEAN's discussions come amid wider regional and global tensions. The Philippines called for the bloc to uphold its long-standing principles to maintain peace and stability in the region.
Security challenges facing ASEAN have not only grown, but have also evolved and diversified. The global geopolitical security environment has not only become more challenging, but it's also become more complex and interconnected. Across our region, we continue to see tensions at sea, protracted internal conflicts, and unresolved border and humanitarian concerns.
CNA senior correspondent Leong Wai-kit joins us live from Cebu. Wai-kit, first up, progress on the South China Sea among the top priorities of the talks this year. So, in a nutshell, what has been achieved so far?
Well, I can tell you that there is definitely optimism on the progress made. In fact, a lot of the rhetoric and remarks coming out of this ASEAN meeting with regard to the South China Sea negotiations has been largely constructive and positive. That said, there is another side to this reality. On the maritime front, the aggressive actions at sea are real, and therefore the risks are real. There are also harsh words being traded between Beijing and Manila. But like you said earlier, Otelli, the Philippines chair is hopeful that China will be open to monthly face-to-face talks to speed up these negotiations. Now, she also touched on what's known as contentious issues surrounding these negotiations. Of course, the term contentious issues have been rephrased by the term milestones from a more neutral tone. So Secretary Lazaro also talked about how ASEAN is dealing with these milestones. Take a listen.
One country, one ASEAN member state came up with a paper on one of the milestones. And then there were other member states who are now coming up with papers on the milestone issues. We, the Philippines, well, just to be open about it, one of the issues is on the definition of self-restraint.
Overall, Secretary Lazaro said that she's hopeful that there will be progress made on the South China Sea Code of Conduct discussions.
Now, Wai-kit, ASEAN Chair Philippines, they've also stressed that the bloc does not endorse Myanmar's elections, which were held in 3 phases. Has there been any decision on how the bloc will move on after Myanmar forms its parliament?
The most concrete decision, Otelli, is that when it comes to dealing with the Myanmar crisis, the 5-point consensus will still remain. But at the press conference earlier, I also asked Secretary Lazaro how ASEAN can strike a balance between the very firm diplomatic position on 5-point consensus and also developments that are now surfacing after the elections that may push us towards business as usual with Myanmar. I asked her how both these tracks can coexist in a post-election Myanmar. This is her answer.
Bilaterally, certain members or ASEAN member states can conduct some discussions with Myanmar. However, as a collective unit, as ASEAN, this is something that has to be. There should be consensus in making certain decisions.
Now, Secretary Lazaro also said, and I'm rephrasing here, that how ASEAN interacts with the newly formed government in Myanmar in April will entirely depend on the junta, but she also stressed that any decisions made will be based on consensus.
Right, many thanks for that report, CNA senior correspondent Leong Wai Kit in Cebu. And of course, we'll have more on the ASEAN gathering on our website, cna.asia, as well as our mobile app. Do check them out. Now, South Korea and Japan's defense ministers are set to meet tomorrow in the Japanese port city of Yokosuka. North Korea expected to be high on the agenda that's likely to include discussions on regional security and ways to deepen defense cooperation. Well, the talks come as Pyongyang gave its strongest signal that it will continue to develop atomic arms. Kim Jong-un is expected to unveil next stage plans to boost North Korea's nuclear war deterrent at a major party congress in February. And for more analysis on Pyongyang's nuclear ambitions, Grant Newsham joins us live from Tokyo. He's a senior research fellow at Japan Forum and for Strategic Studies. So thanks so much for joining us, Colonel Newsham. Okay, so first up, let's just talk a little bit about what's going on between Seoul and Tokyo when they actually come together. These talks, we're hearing all about, deeper defense cooperation, but what do you think will change since the last round, and what are some of the obstacles that still remain?
Well, the Lee Jae-myung administration in South Korea is really launching a charm offensive against Japan. Fundamentally, Lee Jae-myung has said some very anti-Japanese things in the past, and his party has generally been anti-Japanese, but he's acting nice. And I think the Japanese are responding, and where they really want help is for the South Koreans and the Japanese missile defense systems to cooperate better, to have better linkages between them. The Americans have been pushing that for a long time, but particularly from Japan's perspective, the North Korean missile threat has been ongoing and serious for 20 years or so. So cooperation between South Korea and Japan is essential from Japan's perspective. And South Korea, I think for now, we should take them at their word on that too.
So this also raises a bigger question about Kim's strategy here, because all these tests he's been doing, visibly pulling Seoul and Tokyo closer together. So what do you think Pyongyang believes it can gain that outweighs the cost of actually tightening the cooperation between these two other countries?
Well, Pyongyang, it continually moves the benchmark forward, where its capabilities for nuclear weapons and missile delivery systems actually continue to steadily increase, not as fast as they would if it wasn't for sanctions and other isolation that the regime faces, but it steadily moves forward. And this is the key to North Korea's regime survival. Without nuclear weapons, it would get no respect anywhere, or very little. But it just changes the game, and it's the one ace in the hole that the North Korean leader has. And I think he doesn't really care if Japan and South Korea cooperate. It is the one thing that he needs to survive.
So if we zoom this out to regional security, these talks in Japan, how do you see connecting to the bigger strategic picture involving U.S. alliance network, China's calculations, and also Russia's posture? I mean, how do they all fit in?
Well, the Americans are sort of hoping their allies, South Korea and Japan, will do a lot more. In fact, the recent National Defense Strategy has said very much, this is what you have to do. You're going to have to pull your weight when it comes to defending, they don't say it clearly, against China and North Korea. America just can't do as much. So the Japanese and the South Koreans, I think they understand that. They're not quite ready to sort of stand on their own. And it's taken them a little while to get used to that, but I think that's the recognition that this is what the administration is going to require of them. The Chinese, I think they're glad to have, say, North Korea as a distraction, as this causes the Japanese and the Americans to devote a lot of resources, a lot of attention towards North Korea. With South Korea, that's a bit of a different game because the Chinese do think they have a sympathetic administration in Seoul at the moment. So they're watching the Japan, South Korea, and U.S. cooperation with a sort of degree of leeriness. And this has been something the Chinese have said for a long time. You'll recall during the Moon Jae-in administration in South Korea 7-8 years ago, they got him to agree to the 3 no's, that when no missile defense, no linkage with a regional missile defense system, and no joint South Korea, Japan, U.S. Alliance. So the Chinese watch it carefully, and they're trying to balance, though, the sort of the provocative aspect of North Korean missile development, just the nature of the regime. And they like, as I said, they like that as a distraction. The Russians, well, their game is that they need help from the North Koreans. They've gotten troops from North Korea, missiles, armaments for their war in Ukraine. In return, the Russians have provided satellite technology and apparently missile technology as well. So you've got each side that has their own interests. And on the Chinese and Russian generally aligns. On the Japan and Japanese and Korean side, it aligns generally speaking. And the Americans are trying to keep an eye on all of this. So it's not exactly ordered, but it's really constantly in flux. It is not fixed at all.
Right. So I just want to go back to this capability reality check when it comes to Pyongyang's nuclear capability. Right? I mean, they claim, or rather KCNA claiming that, they've made big improvements in accuracy, strike power, mobility, that sort of thing. But what can North Korea actually pull off? I mean, what are they advancing and what are they not?
Well, they have made steady advances in warhead technology, missile technology, and really what you would call survivability. And that means, specifically, moving from liquid fueled rockets to solid fuel rockets. With a liquid fuel rocket, you have to have it in one place while you load it up. And that's easier to see, say, for the Americans, the Japanese, the South Koreans. If it's rocket fueled and you're moving it around on these transporters that they got from the Chinese and then modified them. If you can do that, then you can launch them much quicker, you can conceal them, and it's much harder for somebody trying to stop them to see where it is. So that's an improvement. Accuracy and range has definitely increased. You'll notice also that now they're launching them from underwater. They're still at the test stage, but this is it's an advanced capability, and they've had to do it by trial and error, which is always the case with missiles and nukes. But this is a steady advancement in North Korean nuclear capabilities, and the South Koreans, I think, would like to have some of their own, not being entirely sure of American nuclear coverage. The Japanese are less vocal about having their own nuclear weapons, but they've always had concerns about whether the Americans really will use their own nuclear weapons to defend them. But North Korean advances have been steady. They're not where they would be owing to sanctions and isolation. But the Chinese, the Russians, the Pakistan, and Iran have all played a role in moving that program along. And really, without China's support for the North Korean economy, they wouldn't be in any position to even be worth thinking about nuclear weapons. So you combine all of these, and particularly if you've watched it over 30 years, it's steady progress, and it is something that nobody should be laughing about. The only sort of halfway positive thing you would say is it would be farther along if efforts hadn't been made to control it.
Colonel, we are running out of time, but just before we let you go, just a quick question here. There's always a question about if this is also about Kim's way of trying to reopen negotiations. And if so, do you think that opens up the chance for a Trump-Kim summit later this year?
I don't think so. I think, President Trump has too much going on. But also, I don't think the North Koreans want a deal. What they do is they move their bench line forward, and then they say, okay, if you want to talk, well, we're not going to give up anything, but what do you want to give us? I think the Trump administration knows that it's got other things to deal with besides North Korea, so I don't see that happening.
Thank you so much for helping us understand what's changing around the region. Always great to have you on our program, Grant Newsham, Senior Research Fellow at Japan Forum for Strategic Studies, Tokyo. On that note, we're going to go for a quick break now, but coming up on East Asia tonight, why Taiwan remains divided over the death penalty years after it was ruled constitutional. Taiwan's Constitutional Court upheld the legality of the death penalty in 2024 while imposing strict safeguards. Seen as a compromise in a society where support for capital punishment remains high, the ruling is keeping a charged debate alive. And we're going to take a deep dive into the issue. But before that, here's the viewpoint of a person who supports the death penalty.
Jerome Chen had been married to his wife, Chen Yuanmei, a retired teacher, for 35 years when she was taken from him. On a fateful morning 11 years ago, Mrs. Chen was raped and murdered on her way home from the market. That evening, Mr. Chen found her car parked alone on a quiet street.
警察到了，然后门打开了，你看那个样子。 我的心里是曾经设法把我洗除那个印象嘛，因为洗除不掉嘛。
The court ruled her death a failed robbery that turned into an intentional killing, and sentenced the man who committed the gruesome murder to death. Liu Zhiming had been on death row until the High Court commuted his death sentence to life imprisonment in May 2024.
"改成无期，说有机会有教化。好，这个案子呢送到最高法院来，最高法院一直等到刚才提到的大法官释宪9月20号一出来，不到2个礼拜，最高法院马上判说这个案子杀人犯所犯的不是最严重的罪行。
Mr. Chen, a retired professor, had publicly spoken out against the abolition of the death penalty for the first time since his wife's murder. In its September 2024 ruling, the Constitutional Court said the death penalty must be limited to only the most serious crimes, among other conditions.
这个加拿大的路易斯湖啊，他没办法去，我就背着他的包包去了，跟2个小孩。也就是说，他没做的，我帮他做；他没去的，我帮他去。这样走过来。
But Mr. Chen said he has no closure. When the sentence of his wife's murder was reduced by the High Court, the 73-year-old said he felt like justice had been undone, and his wife was taken from him again.
好，为什么无期我不能接受啊？台湾的无期就是有期嘛，几年而已。现在平均，人家有对平均17.5年，都可以假释了。他38岁犯罪。 17.5不是才不到60岁就又出来了，我支持死刑，100%支持死刑。死刑正义真的是正义，不会说死刑了之后，杀人犯死刑之后，我们的被害人就从死中复活，但是至少在我们心理上得到安慰。
CNA senior correspondent Victoria Jan joins us live from Taipei. Victoria, now I believe you also spoke to a former inmate who spent 16 years on death row before being exonerated. Tell us about his story.
Yes, his name is Xu Ziqiang, and his story really underscores the risks involved in capital punishment. He was wrongly convicted of murder and sentenced to death. For 16 years, he lived on death row, never knowing when an execution order might come. He told us that every routine sound in prison, footsteps, keys, doors opening, carried the fear that this could be his final day. Now, during those years, his wife left him, his parents grew old, family members passed away, and life outside moved on without him. He said the hardest part wasn't just losing his freedom, but living with constant uncertainty. And eventually, new evidence emerged and his conviction was overturned, and he walked free. But he told us those lost years can never be recovered. Now, that experience is why he now speaks out against the death penalty. And because for him, the issue isn't theory or politics. It's the simple reality that once someone is executed, there's no way to go back.
A very unfortunate thing indeed for him. But in the meantime, many observers are saying that the September 2024 ruling keeps the death penalty in name only. So in practical terms, what has actually changed after that decision?
Well, what really changed isn't the existence of the death penalty itself, but how difficult it is to carry it out. The Constitutional Court ruled that capital punishment remains constitutional, but only under extremely strict conditions. Judges must unanimously agree on a death sentence, and the crime must meet a very narrow definition of being among the worst, the most serious. Now, in practice, that has raised the bar so high that many death sentences are now being reduced to life imprisonment instead. At the same time, the death penalty hasn't disappeared. There are still 36 death row inmates currently in prison, but their cases are effectively in limbo as courts apply the new standards. So while Taiwan hasn't abolished the death penalty outright, executions have become far more rare and legally complex. Now, supporters say this reduces the risk of irreversible errors, while critics argue it leaves justice unresolved, and that is what's keeping the debate very much alive. Atali?
Thank you very much for that report. CNA senior correspondent Victoria Jen in Taipei. And for more on Taiwan's death penalty debate, watch CNA Correspondent anytime on CNA.Asia or on YouTube. Fresh episodes drop every Wednesday. And that's all I've got for you for Thursday's edition of East Asia Tonight. Don't forget your headlines anytime at CNA.Asia. And look us up on Facebook and YouTube. Thanks for watching.